You're a relic who can't even remember his own signature, Walter. Sign here, and stop embarrassing yourself. Nobody in that living room moved. The ceiling fan kept turning above us, its blades cutting the same slow circle they'd cut for 30 years, the only sound in a room that had gone completely still. My daughter-in-law's lawyer didn't blink. My son didn't look at me. Somewhere down the hall, the refrigerator hummed on, oblivious, indifferent, the most honest thing in that house. They looked at me the way you look at an old service revolver in a museum case. Something dangerous once, now just dust behind glass. Kept around because it's easier than throwing it away. If you've ever had someone you love decide, quietly and without asking you, that your life was worth more closed out than kept open, stay until the end. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. And if this story means something to you, hit like, subscribe, because you are not going to believe what this old man had locked in a vault they never even knew existed. My name is Walter Doyle. I'm 64 years old. For 36 years I worked in bank security, not the kind you see in movies, not a man in a booth watching monitors, but the man who designed the systems behind the monitors. I built vault architecture. I wrote fraud detection protocols still running in 41 branches across 3 states. I retired 18 months ago as head of vault security and fraud systems for First Heritage Bank, and for the 18 months since, I have lived exactly the way I lived the 36 years before that. Modest ranch house outside Cleveland. 14-year-old pickup truck. Grocery coupons clipped every Sunday out of habit, not necessity. Because necessity in my case was a lie I told on purpose. My late wife Margaret held 4 patents in precision tooling, and when a manufacturing conglomerate bought the licensing rights 11 years ago, it made her, and then me, worth more money than either of us ever wanted to explain to anyone. $78 million sits in a trust bearing her name, managed by people I trust completely, touched by me only twice a year. I wanted my son Nathan to build something of his own. I wanted him to know the weight of a dollar he'd earned, not one he'd inherited. That was the whole plan. It was, I now understand, also the whole mistake. 8 days before the morning I'm about to describe, I stood in a rented tuxedo and watched Nathan marry a woman named Vanessa Cole. I gave a toast. I meant every word of it. I did not know that within a week, that same woman would be standing in my driveway with a corporate lawyer, holding a document with my name forged across the bottom of it. It was a Wednesday. I remember because Wednesday is trash day on my street, and I just wheeled the bin back up the driveway when the black Range Rover pulled in behind my truck, blocking it in like they meant to. Vanessa stepped out first, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky, wearing the kind of white blazer that costs more than my monthly pension check. Behind her, a man in a navy suit unfolded himself from the passenger seat, carrying a leather portfolio the way undertakers carry paperwork, practiced, unbothered, already finished grieving you in his head. Vanessa, I said, because I still believed in that particular minute that I was looking at family. Everything all right? Where's Nathan? She didn't answer. She let the lawyer do it. He introduced himself as Marcus Reyes, said he represented the current legal owners of the property, and set a manila folder on my porch railing like he was setting down something contaminated. Mr. Doyle, I'm here to formally notify you. This residence was transferred and sold 11 days ago. You have 72 hours to vacate. After that, we involve the county sheriff. I want to tell you I felt fear first. I didn't. I felt the specific, cold click of a mechanism I recognized. The exact sound a vault door makes right before it seals. A sound I spent 36 years listening for. Something in my chest simply locked shut. I've owned this house free and clear for 19 years, I said. There's no mortgage to transfer. There's no sale I signed. Rise tapped the folder without opening it further. You signed a power of attorney authorizing the transfer 6 weeks ago. Your son can walk you through it. I'd advise you to start packing rather than debating the paperwork on the porch, Mr. Doyle. I opened the folder. 12 pages. Deed transfer, quitclaim, a power of attorney with a county notary seal pressed into the corner like a bruise. And at the bottom of the last page, my signature, the sharp downward hook on the W, the flat cross of the T, exactly the way I've signed every check for 40 years. I have spent my entire adult life studying how forgery fails. I know the tells better than almost anyone alive. The hesitation marks where a hand traces instead of writes, the unnatural evenness of pressure, the absence of the small tremor a real signature carries because a real hand is never perfectly steady. This one was good. This one was very good. It was also, I knew within 4 seconds, not mine. I did not say that out loud. Something old and careful in me, the part of me that spent decades watching people lie to tellers, watching thieves rehearse their calm, told me to say nothing yet. I'll need to speak with my son. I said instead, and my voice, without my permission, came out thinner than I meant it to. You have his number, Reyes said, and that was it. Vanessa hadn't removed her sunglasses once. She got back in the Range Rover without a word, and it pulled away, and I stood on my own porch holding a folder that said I no longer owned the ground I was standing on. I want to pause here, because if you've never had it happen to you, I need you to understand what 72 hours does to a person's mind before it does anything to their belongings. 72 hours doesn't give you time to hire a lawyer. It doesn't give you time to think. It's not a deadline. It's a design. Somebody built that number on purpose, the way I used to build systems to keep people out. Except this time, the system was built to keep me from thinking straight long enough to fight back. I went inside. I closed the door. And my hand, resting flat against the old oak, started to shake. I need to tell you something about myself that Nathan never learned, because I never told him. In 1987, 3 months into my first job in bank security, a man walked into the branch I worked at with a sawed-off shotgun and put it against the temple of a teller named Rosa Delgado. I was 23 years old. I was standing 11 feet away behind the manager's desk when it happened, and for the 90 seconds that man held that gun to her head, I did not move. I did not speak. I did not do anything except stand there and watch, frozen so completely that afterward the police report described me as unresponsive. Rosa survived. I have never forgotten the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears that day, and for 37 years since, any sudden raised voice, any sharp movement near a doorway, sends my right hand, without my permission, toward the nearest wall, bracing for something to hold on to. It happened on that porch when Reyes tapped the folder. I gripped the railing so hard a splinter went into my palm, and I didn't feel it until an hour later. Margaret knew. Nathan never did. I built a man out of steadiness for my son to lean on, and I never once let him see the part of me that still, 40 years later, flinches. I dialed Nathan's number standing at the kitchen counter, and he picked up on the second ring, which told me everything, because Nathan has never in his life picked up on the second ring. Dad. His voice was rehearsed calm, the way a man sounds when he's been waiting for a call and dreading it in equal measure. Vanessa's lawyer was just here, I said. He says I sold the house. He says I signed a power of attorney 6 weeks ago. Nathan, I did not sign anything. A pause. Then, gently, unbearably gently. Dad, I know this feels sudden to you. I need you to try to stay calm. I am calm, I said, and heard how untrue that sounded even as I said it. You signed it at the house, in front of a notary. You don't remember because, Dad, we've been worried about you for a while now. The stove incident. The dates you've been mixing up. Dr. Hensley thinks, there is no Dr. Hensley, I said. I have never seen a Dr. Hensley in my life, Dad. His voice cracked exactly on cue. Exactly the way a voice cracks when a man has practiced sounding heartbroken in a mirror. This is what Vanessa and I have been trying to tell you. You don't remember the appointment because that's the whole problem. We sold the house to pay for a placement at a wonderful facility. Round-the-clock care. This is us taking care of you, not the other way around. I want you to notice something, because I noticed it in real time, and it is the reason I did not scream at him, did not drive to his apartment and put my hands on his collar the way every cell in my body wanted to. He said the stove incident, like it was a settled fact between us, a shared memory, when I had no memory of any stove incident at all. And a man who has spent 36 years reading fraud for a living knows exactly what that sentence is. It's not a memory, it's a plant. Somebody built it, the same careful way somebody built my signature. Tell me about the stove, I said quietly. 3 weeks ago, you left the burner on, went out to the garage, nearly burned the kitchen down. Vanessa and I came by and caught it in time. I remembered that afternoon perfectly. Nathan had come by with groceries, insisted on cooking, and asked me to go find a torque wrench in the garage for a rattle in Vanessa's car. I'd been gone 12 minutes. I came back to a haze of smoke and Nathan standing over a smoking pot, already halfway to tears, already telling me I'd left the burner too high before I'd even finished coughing. I had believed him that day. I had actually apologized to my own son for a fire he set. "Okay, Nathan," I said, and let my voice go soft and defeated, because for the first time in this conversation I understood exactly what kind of conversation I was having and exactly what kind of man I needed to become to survive it. "Okay, I'll start packing. That's good, Dad. That's the right thing." He sounded relieved. He sounded, God help me, proud of himself. I hung up the phone and stood in my kitchen for a long time, listening to the refrigerator hum, feeling the vault door in my chest lock the rest of the way shut. Whatever Father Nathan had grown up with, patient, quiet, endlessly available, had just quietly died on that phone call. What replaced him had spent 36 years learning exactly how people build a lie so it survives a bank examiner's audit, and exactly how those lies fail. I carried the folder to my study and turned on the lamp. I keep a jeweler's loupe in my desk drawer, a habit left over from decades of examining questioned documents before I ever trusted a machine to do it. I fit it to my eye and bent over the notary seal at the bottom of the power of attorney. The date stamped beneath the seal read June the 4th. I sat back slowly. On June the 4th, I had not been anywhere near a notary's office in Cleveland. I had been standing on the frozen deck of a charter boat off Kodiak, Alaska, hauling in a 60-pound halibut with 15 other men, 400 miles from a working cell tower, a trip I take every June without fail, because it was the 1 week a year Margaret used to insist I take entirely for myself. I had the charter receipts. I had the credit card charge for gear rental at the marina. I had 15 witnesses and a boat captain who kept a signed logbook of every guest for insurance purposes. I pulled my old fishing log down from the shelf, the leather one Margaret gave me our last Christmas together, and found the entry in my own handwriting. June 4th, Kodiak, halibut, 61 pounds, 40 minutes to land, wind out of the northwest. Whoever forged my signature had built something almost flawless. And then, in the arrogance of moving fast, they had picked a date I could disprove with a fishing log and a boat captain's sworn statement. I closed the leather journal and sat very still in the lamplight, feeling something shift in my chest that wasn't fear anymore. In 36 years of bank security, I learned one truth above every other. The moment a criminal believes they've already won is the exact moment they stop being careful. Nathan and Vanessa believed they were looking at a frightened old man on a fixed pension, too foggy-minded to fight back, too ashamed to ask for help. They had no idea they had just declared war on the man who taught 2 generations of bank examiners how to catch exactly this kind of lie. I picked up the phone again, not to call my son this time. To call the one person alive who still had the authority and the will to help me find out exactly how deep this went, and exactly who had been desperate enough, or greedy enough, to convince my own son that murdering his father's peace of mind was a fair price to pay for whatever they were so frantically trying to buy their way out of. I keep an encrypted line I built myself, years ago, back when the bank still let me design my own field kit. It doesn't route through any tower a subpoena could find in a hurry. I dug the handset out of the small floor safe hidden beneath the armoire in my bedroom, a safe I installed the same weekend I retired, more out of professional habit than any real need, and dialed a number I still knew by heart. Ruth Alvarez had worked under me for 19 years before she left to manage private trusts full-time. She was the only person alive, apart from 2 attorneys in a firm downtown, who knew the actual size of the fortune sitting quietly under Margaret's name. She answered on the first ring, the way people do when they've spent a career waiting for calls that matter. "Walter, it's late even for you." "Ruth, I need a full audit." "Nathan and Vanessa, everything, credit, debt, banking history, the last 5 years. There was a pause I recognized, the particular silence of someone recalibrating everything they thought they knew about a conversation. "Walter, what happened? They forged my signature on a power of attorney, sold my house out from under me, told me I'm losing my memory to cover it." I need to understand why two people with a Range Rover and a downtown penthouse would risk federal fraud charges over a $400,000 house. Give me until tomorrow evening, she said, and her voice had already gone from friend to weapon, clean and precise. And Walter, do not go to the police yet, not until we know what we're actually looking at. A messy criminal complaint this early tips them off and gives them time to build a defense. She was right, and some part of me was almost sorry she was. I wanted this to be simple. I wanted to call a detective, hand him the fishing log, and watch handcuffs close around my son's wrists by morning. But 36 years of chasing fraud teaches you that the fastest path to justice is rarely the cleanest one, and the people who panic and go loud are the ones who lose. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my study with the lamp on, and somewhere around 2 in the morning I did something I am not proud of, though I would do it again tomorrow without hesitation. I drove to a 24-hour hardware store on the far side of town, the kind with fluorescent lighting that makes everyone look guilty, and bought 2 of the smallest voice recorders on the shelf. Not the kind you buy to dictate notes. The kind built to disappear into furniture. The next afternoon I called Vanessa myself, and I let my voice shake exactly the way a defeated old man's voice should. I found some of Margaret's photo albums, I told her, and the facility only lets me bring 2 suitcases. I can't throw away her whole life. Could I drop the box at your place, just to keep it safe? I won't stay long. I heard the calculation happen in the silence before she answered. The same calculation I'd built systems to detect for 36 years. The slight hesitation of a person weighing appearances against inconvenience. Denying a grieving widower his dead wife's photographs was bad optics even for her. Fine. Quick, though. We're busy. I carried Margaret's cedar photo chest up to their 19th floor penthouse myself, moving slower than I needed to, letting my shoulders round the way age is supposed to round them. Vanessa opened the door in a silk robe, phone already in hand, and looked at me the way you look at a delivery you didn't order. I shuffled across her pale hardwood floor and let the box slip deliberately from my grip near the edge of her sectional sofa, sending photographs scattering across the wood. For God's sake, Walter, be careful, she snapped, making no move to help me gather them, already turning back toward the kitchen where her phone had started buzzing again. The moment her back was turned, I reached beneath the heavy wooden crossbeam of the sofa frame and pressed the first recorder against it, out of sight, out of reach of any casual cleaning. I gathered the photographs slowly, buying myself the 90 seconds I needed, then asked to use the bathroom before I left. An old man's excuse nobody questions. Nathan kept a small home office off the master bedroom, soundproofed, glass-walled, the kind of room built for a man who wanted to feel important. I slipped the second recorder behind the toilet tank in the private bath attached to it, pressed the adhesive flat against cool porcelain, and walked back out with my shoulders still bent, thanking Vanessa 3 separate times as I left, laying the gratitude on thick enough that she rolled her eyes and told me to lock the door on my way out. I want to say clearly, because it matters, that I did not plant those devices to build a criminal case. Anything I recorded in a home I no longer owned wouldn't survive a defense attorney's first motion, and I knew that. I planted them because I needed something no forged document could give me. The truth of what my son actually believed about what he was doing to me. I needed to know if there was any part of him left worth saving before I decided how far I was willing to go. I got my answer at 2 in the morning, alone in my study. Headphones pressed to my ears, coffee gone cold at my elbow. The feed opened on the sound of a door slamming and fast, uneven footsteps crossing hardwood. Nathan, pacing, the particular rhythm of a man who has stopped being able to sit still. Ice against crystal, the stiff pour of something he didn't need at that hour. Have you completely lost your mind? Vanessa's voice, and it wasn't the honeyed voice she used on porches. It was flat, contemptuous. Tired the way you're tired of a chore. It's 6 in the morning and you're drinking scotch like it's going to fix something. I forged a federal document, Vanessa. Nathan's voice cracked on the word forged, high and thin. Nothing like the composed man who'd told me about Dr. Hensley. I sold my father's house out from under him with a fake power of attorney. Do you understand what we've done? We didn't borrow money from a friend. This is real estate fraud. This is prison. Keep your voice down. A pause, the click of heels crossing the floor toward him. The paperwork's filed, Lucas, Nathan. She caught herself, and something about that small slip, calling him by the wrong name in a moment of stress, told me exactly how much this marriage actually meant to her. Your father believes every word. He's packing boxes right now, thinking his mind is going. We are 1 week from being completely clear. I wired $40,000 out of his personal checking account yesterday, Nathan said, and I felt something in my own chest go very still and very cold, the vault door sealing another turn. His entire pension, Vanessa. Money he worked 40 years at the plant to save, and I used it to make one interest payment. We are not 1 week from clear. We are drowning. I sat with that sentence for a long moment before I let the recording keep playing. $40,000. Not house equity. Not trust assets he didn't know existed. The actual working balance of the modest local checking account I'd kept precisely so my son would never suspect there was anything more. He hadn't just forged a deed. He had reached directly into the one account he thought represented the entirety of my worldly savings and taken every dollar in it. Vanessa's answer, when it came, was so devoid of anything resembling remorse that I had to take the headphones off for a moment and simply breathe. You want to talk about drowning? Her voice had gone low and dangerous and almost amused. We owe $2.3 million, Nathan, not to a bank that sends polite letters. We owe it to people who don't file lawsuits, they collect. I put the headphones back on. She explained it to him the way you'd explain a spreadsheet to someone who'd already agreed to sign it. A private lending operation out of the industrial corridor south of Chicago. Money she'd borrowed 18 months earlier to cover margin calls on a series of leveraged commodities trades that had gone catastrophically wrong. Her consulting firm, the one she'd spent our entire family Christmas dinner describing to me as a boutique strategy practice serving Fortune 500 clients, was in fact an empty registration used to disguise what she actually did all day, which was gamble borrowed money on positions she didn't understand. She had burned through her own accounts first, then Nathan's, then a home equity line against the penthouse, and when all of that wasn't enough, she'd gone to men who didn't require collateral because they had other, more permanent ways of guaranteeing repayment. They gave us 10 days, she said. 10 days to produce 1 million, or they send someone to this apartment. Not to talk, Nathan, to make a point. The line went quiet except for the sound of Nathan's breathing, ragged and shallow, a sound I recognized because I had made that exact sound myself in 1987, standing 11 feet from a shotgun, frozen and useless. I felt something for my son in that moment that surprised me. Not forgiveness, nothing close to it, but a flicker of the old ache, the same ache I used to feel watching him strike out at Little League games, wanting to walk out onto the field and fix it for him, even though I knew I couldn't. The ache didn't survive what came next. We can get the house cash by Friday, Nathan said, and there was something almost hopeful in it, the sound of a man grasping at the smallest available decency. That covers the first million. We find him a state facility somewhere, cheap, basic, but safe. We don't need anything more elaborate than that. Vanessa laughed. It wasn't nervous, it wasn't relief. It was the low, satisfied laugh of someone admiring a trap they'd already built. A state facility. She said it like it was adorable, like Nathan had suggested something a child might propose. Nathan, I never intended to spend a cent keeping your father comfortable somewhere. I found a placement service 6 weeks ago. It's not a licensed facility. It's a private hospice compound about 10 miles north of the border, off any registry. No inspectors, no visiting hours, no questions. Families use it specifically because they need someone to disappear quietly. I stopped breathing. The study around me went very far away. The lamp light, the leather logbook, the cold coffee. All of it shrinking to a single pinprick of attention on the voice in my ears. They keep patients sedated around the clock, she continued, and her voice had the same clinical, bored precision she must have used to explain a spreadsheet. At his age, with the stress of relocation and the medication load, his heart gives out inside a month. There's no autopsy at a place like that, no investigation. The problem simply resolves itself. Vanessa, Nathan's voice broke entirely now. No performance left in it. That's not a nursing home plan. You're describing letting him die. You're describing. I'm describing the only version of this where we survive, she said. Cutting him off, flat as a closed ledger. 6 months ago, when I first understood how deep the margin calls were, I filed a life insurance application in his name. I used the forged power of attorney and a set of doctored medical evaluations to get it approved without him ever knowing. $4.5 million, Nathan. Payable on natural death. No contestability clause after the first policy year, which we are safely past. If he dies quietly in an unlicensed facility with a compliant doctor's signature on the certificate, that money clears every debt we have within 30 days. We keep the rest. We rebuild everything. I have sat across interrogation tables from men who committed wire fraud against elderly clients, men who drained retirement accounts one careful transfer at a time, and I believed, until that exact moment in my study at 2 a.m, that I understood the outer edge of what a person could convince themselves was acceptable. I did not. My daughter-in-law had priced the remainder of my life at $4.5 million, and she had done the math on my death the same way she'd apparently done the math on everything else in her life. Coldly, efficiently, without once letting the fact that I was a human being enter the calculation. I waited for my son to end it there. I waited for him to throw his drink against the wall, to call the whole scheme what it actually was, to walk out of that soundproofed office and drive to my house and tell me everything, and let me help him the way I had spent his entire childhood helping him. Instead, after a long, terrible silence, he asked a question that told me exactly what kind of man he had let himself become. Are you certain there's no paper trail back to us? The transport people, the facility, none of it traces. Cash only, private contractors. Nobody asks questions when nobody's being paid to ask. Okay, Nathan said. And his voice had gone hollow, resigned, empty of the sun I'd raised. Okay. We put him in the car Monday morning. I took the headphones off and set them down very carefully on the desk. The way you set down something you're afraid might shatter if handled roughly. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked on, indifferent, the same steady sound that had comforted me my entire adult life now sounding. For the first time, like a countdown towards something I couldn't undo, I did not cry. I want to be honest with you about that, because I think there's a version of this story where the honest thing would be tears, and that isn't what happened. What happened is that something in me went very quiet and very clear, the way a room goes quiet right before an alarm trips, right before the system you've spent your whole life building finally does exactly what you built it to do. I picked up the encrypted phone and called Ruth back, even though it wasn't yet 6 a.m. I have the audio, I said before she could ask why I was calling so early. They're planning to have me placed in an unlicensed facility and left to die under sedation. There's a $4.5 million policy on my life, taken out with a forged authorization. They owe $2.3 million to a private lender who's threatened them with violence if they don't pay within 10 days. The silence on the line was long enough that I heard her set something down, carefully, the way you set down a cup when your hands have started to shake. Walter, we call the FBI right now. Today, I have a contact in the regional field office who— No, I said, and I heard in my own voice the same flat, final register I just listened to in Vanessa's. Not yet. If we go to the bureau today, it becomes a case file. Case files take months, and in the meantime they scatter, they lawyer up, and everything I actually own gets tied up in litigation while a jury decides whether an old man's meds can be trusted. I want something faster than that, Ruth, and I want it to hurt more. What are you asking me to do? I looked at the leather fishing log still open on my desk, at the entry for June the 4th written in my own steady hand, at the evidence of a lie built by two people who had assumed, correctly for 36 years and incorrectly starting 8 days ago, that a quiet man with a fixed pension had nothing left to fight with. Find out exactly who's holding that $2.3 million debt, I said. I want to know their name, their terms, and how fast money moves when the right amount of it shows up at their door. Because before Monday morning, Ruth, I intend to become the only creditor my son has left in the world. I didn't hear back from Ruth until almost 11 the next night, and when the encrypted line finally rang, I was sitting exactly where she'd left me. In the study, the desk lamp burning a small circle of light against a room, otherwise gone dark, the leather fishing log still open to June the 4th. "I have it," she said, no greeting, straight into the work the way she always did when the work mattered. It took longer than I wanted. This isn't a bank loan, Walter. There's no paper trail that starts with an application. It starts with a man named Julius Marek, who runs what looks, on the surface, like a commercial real estate holding company out of Cicero, Illinois. Underneath that, he's a private lender who doesn't file with any regulator, doesn't report to a credit bureau, and doesn't negotiate. How do you know all that without breaking a law yourself? It mattered to me that she answer that honestly, because I had spent 36 years building the exact systems designed to catch people who cut that corner, and I was not going to let my own grief turn me into the kind of man I'd spent a career chasing. "Because I didn't have to break anything," Ruth said. "Vanessa's wire out to Marek's holding account 11 days ago tripped an automatic suspicious activity report. Any transfer over $10,000 to an account with Marek's flag history triggers one automatically. That's federal law, not snooping. My old contact in First Heritage's Financial Crimes Unit, Carol Bennett, you trained her yourself in '94. She pulled the filing because your name is still listed as an emergency contact of record on one of Nathan's old joint accounts from when he was 22, and you co-signed his first apartment lease. That listing never got removed. It's the only reason Carol could legally show me anything at all, and even then, all we have is the filing, not the underlying account details. Everything else, the $2.3 million balance, the 10-day ultimatum, Marek's terms that came from what you recorded yourself in a home you're still legally entitled to visit as a guest of the leaseholder. I want you to understand that distinction clearly, Walter, because if this ever ends up in front of a judge, the difference between what Carol legally disclosed and what a hacked account would have given us is the difference between a case that holds and a case that gets thrown out in the first hearing. I sat with that a moment, grateful, in a strange cold way that even now, even furious, some part of me was still checking the seams the way I'd trained myself to check them for 36 years. "What else?" I said. "This is where it gets strange." I heard papers shifting on her end. "Marek's operation isn't the kind that goes looking for clients. He doesn't advertise. He doesn't take walk-ins. And a boutique consulting firm with no real revenue shouldn't have found their way to him at all." Someone introduced Vanessa. I found the connection buried in an old business registration filing. A man named Preston Wexler, listed as a co-signer on the original LLC paperwork for Vanessa's consulting shell 6 years ago before she ever met Nathan. Wexler runs a private trading advisory out of the same building as Marek's front company. Same floor, Walter. Same elevator bank, Gay. So he's her partner. He's more than that. I pulled everything public I could find on Wexler in an afternoon, which tells you something on its own. A man that easy to research either doesn't think anyone's looking or wants to be found exactly this far and no further. 3 other clients of his, going back 9 years, all wealthy, all with an aging parent or in-law sitting on an estate. All 3 clients ended up leveraged into debt with Marek's operation within 18 months of working with Wexler. All 3, Walter, ended up needing fast liquid cash right around the time an elderly relative's estate became available. She let that sit for a second. "I don't think Vanessa built this trap. I think she walked into one, and I think whoever built it has done this before, more than once, and made money doing it every time." I sat very still. The clock in the hall ticked its steady rhythm, and I found myself, for the first time since the morning on my porch, feeling something other than cold fury. I felt the particular, disorienting vertigo of a man who has spent days constructing his son's villainy, only to learn the story goes a floor deeper than he'd built it. It did not make Nathan innocent. Nothing was going to make Nathan innocent. Not after what I'd heard him agree to in that recording. But it meant the architecture of this, the borrowed money, the desperate marriage into old family wealth, the timing of it all landing 8 days after a wedding, had another hand on the blueprint besides Vanessa's. Find out what Wexler gets out of it, I said. Not theory. I want a mechanism. Money doesn't move for no reason, and men like that don't do favors. Give me until morning, Ruth said, and hung up before I could tell her to be careful, which was probably for the best, because I don't think either of us believed in careful anymore. I didn't go to bed. I hadn't gone to bed properly in 3 nights by then, and I want to be honest that it was starting to show. My hands had developed a fine, persistent tremor that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with the particular exhaustion of holding still while your own child plans your death. I made coffee I didn't drink. I sat at the kitchen island where, days earlier, I had spread the forged documents out like blueprints, and I found myself instead pulling down a different box entirely. The one on the top shelf of the hall closet that I hadn't opened since the year Margaret died. Inside it were the letters. Margaret used to write me one every year on our anniversary, even the years we spent the day together, because she said a marriage needed a record somewhere besides memory, since memory lies and paper mostly doesn't. I hadn't read them since the funeral. I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets, an old man in a bathrobe surrounded by his dead wife's handwriting, and I found the last one she ever wrote, dated 4 months before the diagnosis that took her 11 weeks later. Walter, you build vaults for a living, and you've built one around our son too, without ever meaning to. He doesn't know how to ask you for help because you've never once let him watch you need it. I worry, some nights, that we're raising a boy who thinks love has to be earned through performance, because that's the only kind he's ever seen from either of us. Don't wait for a crisis to show him the man underneath the vault. Promise me. I sat with that letter for a long time. I want to tell you I felt only grief reading it, but that would be a lie, and I've told enough lies about myself in this story already, to Nathan, to Vanessa, to the mirror. What I felt underneath the grief was the particular shame of a man recognizing his own handwriting in someone else's warning. I had missed Nathan's college graduation for a regional security audit I could have delegated to 3 other people, and told myself, at the time, that the job mattered more than the ceremony, that he'd understand, that there'd be other days. I had never once told him about the money, not because I doubted his character exactly, but because some coward's corner of me was afraid of finding out what he'd become if he ever had access to it, and in trying to protect him from that answer, I'd built exactly the kind of silence a person like Vanessa Cole could walk into and fill however she wanted. Margaret had seen it coming 11 years before it happened. I had been too busy building vaults to listen. I put the letter back in the box carefully, the way you handle something that's already done all the damage it's capable of doing. And then I did something I had not let myself do since the funeral. I called my old partner from the branch where I'd started, a woman named Rosa Delgado, the same Rosa who'd had a shotgun against her temple in 1987, the woman whose survival I still measured my own courage against every day of my life without ever telling her so. She was 71 now, retired, living 2 towns over. She answered on the 4th ring, half asleep, and when I told her everything, the forged deed, the eviction, the recordings, the insurance policy, all of it, she went quiet for a long moment, and then she said the thing I think I'd called her to hear. Walter Doyle, you stood between me and that gun 37 years ago, whether you remember it that way or not. You didn't move because you were afraid. You moved your whole body 2 steps to your left, right into that man's sight line, and I've never once forgotten it, even though you clearly have. You come from steel, Walter. Whatever you're about to do to that boy, you do it, and you call me when it's finished, and I'll bring the coffee. I hadn't remembered it that way. I'd remembered 90 seconds of paralysis. It turns out grief and fear rewrite memory in whatever direction shame needs it to go, and it took a 71-year-old woman half asleep at midnight to hand me back a version of that day I could actually stand inside. Something in my chest loosened for the first time in 3 days, and before I fully understood what I was doing, I was crying, quietly, sitting on my kitchen floor at 1 in the morning, and Rosa stayed on the line without saying anything else, just breathing steadily on the other end, until I was done. Ruth called back at 9 the next morning with the mechanism I'd asked for. Wexler doesn't just introduce clients to Merrick for a referral fee, she said. He's structured it so that when a client defaults and their collateral gets seized or their family estate gets liquidated to cover the debt, Wexler's advisory firm has a standing arrangement to manage the resulting liquid assets. For a management fee, of course, very legitimate on paper. He's not just profiting from the debt, Walter. He set himself up to profit from exactly the outcome he's been quietly steering Vanessa toward for 6 years. If your estate gets liquidated to pay Merrick off, Wexler manages what's left. He wins either way. He built this so he can't lose. And Vanessa doesn't know. I don't think she has any idea she's the mark in her own scheme, Ruth said, which doesn't make what she's planning to do to you forgivable. But it does tell you something about where the real leverage sits. I sat with the whole shape of it laid out in front of me. My son, drowning and desperate enough to agree to my death. My daughter-in-law, cruel enough to price that death and cold enough to plan it, but herself being quietly farmed by a man 3 floors down who'd done this to at least 3 other families before mine, and underneath all of it, the $2.3 million debt sitting like a fuse already lit. 10 days ticking down toward an ultimatum from men who did not send collection letters. Buy the debt, I told Ruth, all of it. I want Merrick paid in full, and I want the promissory notes assigned to a holding entity nobody can trace back to me for at least 90 days. Route it through 3 layers if you have to. I don't want them relieved. I want them owned. Walter, that's $2.3 million to save 2 people who are planning to murder you. I'm not saving them, I said. I'm removing the only leash currently keeping this from happening exactly the way they planned it. If Merrick's men show up at that penthouse before I'm ready, everything I'm building collapses into chaos and somebody gets hurt who doesn't deserve it. A doorman, a neighbor, God knows who. I want control of the timeline, Ruth, not mercy. Control, she didn't argue further. 2 hours later, the transfer cleared, and somewhere in Cicero, Illinois, a man named Julius Merrick accepted a lump sum buyout from a holding company he had no reason to question, signed over every note he held on my son and daughter-in-law, and walked away $2.3 million richer and entirely indifferent to what happened next. I now held, legally and completely, every debt that had been about to break my son's legs. There was one more piece I needed before Monday, and it was the part of this that had kept me awake longest, turning it over, because it required something from me that had nothing to do with forged signatures or wire transfers. I picked up the phone one final time and called a man I had not spoken to in almost a decade, Diego Ruiz, who had grown up 2 streets over from us, who had been closer to Nathan through high school and half of college than any friend I'd ever had at that age, until some falling out over a business deal years ago had gone quiet between them. Diego answered, surprised to hear my voice, and when I explained enough of the situation to make clear how serious it was, not everything, not yet, but enough, he went silent for a long moment before he spoke. Mr. Doyle, I always thought something was off about her. Nathan stopped taking my calls about a year after they started dating. I chalked it up to a new relationship. Everybody does that for a while. I didn't think. He stopped himself. What do you need from me? I need you at an event this Friday, I said. The Margaret Doyle Memorial Gala. It's the annual fundraiser for the Literacy Foundation my late wife started. Nathan and Vanessa are hosting it this year. Their idea, apparently, a gesture of family goodwill right before they intended to finish moving me out. I need you there, not to do anything, just to be in the room, in case the moment comes where somebody who actually knew Nathan before all this needs to remind him who he used to be. I'll be there, Diego said without hesitation, and something in the plainness of it, no negotiation, no questions about what was in it for him, reminded me that not everyone close to my son had been rotted through by whatever Vanessa and Wexler had built around him. There were still people, quietly, who would show up for no reason except that it mattered. Friday arrived the way deadlines always do, faster than the calendar promises. I spent the morning at the tailor's, having a charcoal suit I hadn't worn in 6 years let out at the shoulders, and standing in front of that mirror watching a man reappear who I hadn't seen in a long time. Not Walter the widower in a flannel shirt clipping coupons, but Walter Doyle, 36 years of bank security, compressed into the set of his jaw. I felt the last of the tremor in my hands finally go still. The Margaret Doyle Memorial Gala was held every year in the Hendricks Building downtown, a restored 1920s bank hall with marble columns and a vaulted ceiling that still bore the ghost outline of the teller windows that used to run its length. The irony of that location was not lost on me, and I suspect, given what I'd learned about him, it would not be lost on Julius Merrick either, if he'd ever cared to ask where his money had gone. 200 guests, string quartet, a silent auction table lined with donated items, and at the head table, my son and his wife dressed for a celebration they had already privately scheduled to be the last public appearance either of them would need to make with me alive. I arrived 40 minutes after the doors opened, in the charcoal suit, my late wife's platinum watch on my wrist for the first time since her funeral, and I watched the exact moment Nathan saw me across that marble hall. The moment his face, mid-conversation with a donor, went from practiced warmth to something closer to seeing a ghost. Ruth was already seated near the back, tablet in hand. Rosa Delgado sat 2 tables over, having driven 40 minutes to be there. Dressed in the same navy dress she'd worn to Margaret's funeral, Diego stood near the bar, watching Nathan the way an old friend watches someone he's worried about, not yet certain what he's about to witness. And at the head table, Vanessa's eyes found mine across the room, and for the first time since that morning on my porch, I watched the sunglasses confidence she'd worn like armor start, almost imperceptibly, to crack. She had built her entire plan around one belief, that the old man in the flannel shirt with the fixed pension would be gone from this world within a month, quietly, without a fight, without ever knowing what had truly been decided for him. She was about to learn, in front of 200 witnesses and a string quartet playing softly beneath the restored ceiling of the very kind of building I'd spent 36 years protecting, exactly how badly she had misjudged the man she'd married into. I moved through the crowd slowly, shaking hands. I hadn't shaken in years, letting the room notice me the way a room notices a man who used to matter and has apparently decided to matter again. Nathan crossed toward me before I'd made it halfway to the head table, his face doing something complicated between fear and relief, as if some small, buried part of him had been hoping all week that I would simply appear and make the decision he couldn't bring himself to make. "Dad, you came." His voice cracked on the last word. "I wasn't sure you'd, after everything. I wouldn't miss your mother's gala," I said, and watched that land exactly the way I intended it to. Vanessa reached us then, a champagne flute in one hand, her smile already assembled for the cameras a local paper had sent to cover the event. "Walter, what a surprise." Her eyes flicked briefly toward the exits, the way a person's eyes flick when they're recalculating a room they thought they'd already secured. "I have something I'd like to say," I told her, pitched loud enough that the half-dozen guests nearest us went quiet, the way a crowd goes quiet when it senses, before it understands why, that something is about to happen. A toast, in Margaret's memory. It's only right since this is her night. Nathan's hand found my elbow, steering, urgent. "Dad, maybe we do this somewhere private." "No," I said, and something in my voice made him let go. "I think it should be right here." I didn't wait for permission. I walked to the small stage at the front of the hall, where the Foundation's director had set up a microphone for the evening's remarks, and I picked it up before anyone could stop me. 200 faces turned toward the marble columns and the restored teller windows and the old man in the charcoal suit standing beneath them. "Most of you knew my wife Margaret," I began, and my voice, to my own surprise, came out steady. "She believed a person's worth wasn't measured by what they held on to, but by what they were willing to hand someone else without asking for it back. She started this foundation because she believed every child deserved a fair shot at a life they hadn't been handed. I've been thinking about that a great deal this week." Vanessa's smile had not moved, but her knuckles had gone white around the champagne flute. 8 days after my son's wedding, I continued, I received a 72-hour eviction notice from my own home. The power of attorney authorizing the sale of that house was signed with a forged signature, notarized on a date I can prove. with a fishing log and 15 witnesses, that I was 400 miles offshore in the Gulf of Alaska. I have spent this past week learning things about my son and daughter-in-law that no father should ever have to learn about the people he loves. The room had gone entirely still. Somewhere near the back, a fork clinked against a plate and then stopped, mid-motion, as if the person holding it had frozen along with everyone else. "Walter, this isn't the place," Vanessa started, moving toward the stage, and it was Nathan, of all people, who put a hand on her arm to stop her, his face gone the color of the marble beneath his feet. "You told my son," I said, looking directly at her now, "that at my age, with the stress of relocation and the right medication, my heart would give out inside a month. You called it a biological certainty. You said there would be no autopsy at the place you'd chosen for me, no investigation, that the problem would simply, quietly, resolve itself." A woman near the front gasped audibly. I heard Ruth, seated in the back, set her tablet down with deliberate, unhurried calm. "You are a delusional old fool," Vanessa said, and her voice had lost every trace of the polish it wore in daylight, gone sharp and thin with panic. "You have absolutely no evidence of any of this. You are a confused old man making wild accusations at your own son's wedding gala, and frankly, Walter, it only proves everything we've said about your condition. Margaret would be ashamed to see you like this. I want to tell you that hearing my dead wife's name used as a weapon didn't affect me. It did. Something in my chest went very cold, colder than the forged signature had, colder than the recording of my own murder being planned in a soundproofed office. But cold, I have found, is useful. Cold is precise. Margaret," I said quietly, "spent the last 4 months of her life worrying that I'd built a vault around our son, instead of teaching him how to open one. She was right to worry. I own that failure completely, and I will carry it for the rest of my life. But she never once, in 39 years of marriage, mistook cruelty for strength the way you have. Don't use her name again." I reached into my breast pocket and took out my phone, already connected to the venue's sound system through a request I'd made to the events coordinator an hour earlier, using a business card that still, out of 18 months of habit, read Walter Doyle, First Heritage Bank. I pressed play. Vanessa's own voice, low and satisfied and utterly without mercy, filled the vaulted hall. "At his age, with the stress of relocation and the medication load, his heart gives out inside a month. There's no autopsy at a place like that." The string quartet had stopped playing without anyone telling them to. 200 people stood frozen beneath a ceiling that had once watched over a working bank vault, listening to a woman calmly price an old man's death at $4.5 million. Vanessa's champagne flute slipped from her hand and shattered against the marble floor. The sound sharp and absolute in a silence, otherwise so complete, I could hear the string quartet's cellist breathing. Nathan didn't move. He stood exactly where he was, staring at the floor, his shoulders curling inward, the way they used to curl when he was 7 years old and about to be caught in a lie he hadn't yet learned how to tell well. I let the recording run another 20 seconds. Nathan's own voice, asking whether the transport contractors could be traced, agreeing, in the end, to put me in that car Monday morning. And then I stopped it, because I did not need the whole room to hear every word of his complicity to understand what had happened. I needed them to hear enough. It was Diego who moved first. He stepped away from the bar, crossed the marble floor in long, deliberate strides, and stood directly beside Nathan, not comforting him, not accusing him, just standing there, close enough that Nathan flinched at the presence of someone who'd known him before any of this. "Say something," Diego said, quiet but carrying in the dead silence of the room. "Tell them it's not true. Tell them, Nathan." Nathan didn't say anything. That was its own answer, and the room understood it as clearly as if he'd shouted a confession. "This is a setup," Vanessa said, her voice climbing toward hysteria now, one hand braced against the head table for balance. "That recording is fabricated. You can't prove any of this holds up, Walter. You have no money, no lawyer." "No, I have a great deal of money," I said, and something in the flatness of that sentence finally seemed to reach her. Some deep animal recognition that the ground beneath her had shifted in a way champagne and confidence couldn't fix. "I've spent this week using it. My late wife's trust is worth $78 million, Vanessa. I've known about it for 11 years and never touched it, because I wanted my son to build his own life. That trust bought your $2.3 million debt to a man named Julius Marek 4 days ago. Every dollar you owe, you now owe to me. The color left her face entirely. And this morning, I continued, I filed a formal fraud report with First Heritage Bank's Financial Crimes Unit, supported by the forged power of attorney, the falsified notary date, and my documented Alaska alibi. As of 2 hours ago, every account in either of your names at First Heritage, checking, the LLC operating account for your consulting entity, and the joint account tied to the fraudulent wire transfer of my pension funds, has been frozen pending federal investigation. The bank you thought would never look closely at a well-dressed couple with a downtown address has closed every account you believed was yours. I hadn't planned to feel anything as I said it. 36 years of training told me to deliver that line the way I'd deliver any closed case, clean and final. Instead, I felt the strange, hollow ache of watching a door shut on a version of my son I'd spent his whole life hoping to see grow into a man. Watching it shut, this time, by my own hand, there was a commotion near the entrance. Then, two men in dark suits, moving through the crowd, with the particular unhurried authority of people who did this for a living, federal agents, arranged through a contact Ruth had cultivated over the years. Standing by since dinner service began, waiting only for my signal, Vanessa saw them and took a single, stumbling step backward, directly into the head table, sending a stack of place cards sliding to the floor. It was in that moment, with the room fractured into gasps and murmurs, and the string quartet's first violinist quietly gathering her instrument case as if sensing the evening had ended, that a small voice cut through everything else. "Grandpa Walter, why is everyone yelling?" I turned. Rosa Delgado's granddaughter, maybe 7 years old, had wandered from her table, drawn by the noise the way children are always drawn toward exactly the conversations adults are trying to have without them. She wasn't my grandchild by blood, but Rosa had brought her to every gathering of mine for years, and the girl had taken to calling me that without anyone correcting her. "Somebody did something very wrong," I said, crouching, my knees protesting the way they always did now, and everyone's finding out about it at the same time. She considered this with the total seriousness only a 7-year-old can bring to a question. "Did they say sorry?" The question landed in that marble hall, harder than anything I'd said into the microphone. Because that was the entire missing piece, wasn't it? Not the money, not the forged documents, not even the plan to let me die quietly in an unlicensed room somewhere near the border. It was that in a week of lies, not one word of it had ever been an apology. Everyone in earshot heard a child ask, in the plainest possible language, the question the whole gala had been circling without naming. "No, sweetheart," I said. "Not yet." I straightened, my knees cracking audibly in the silence, and found Nathan looking at me across the room with an expression I hadn't seen on his face since he was small. Not the practiced grief of the phone call, not the calculated warmth of a man managing his father, but something raw and unguarded and genuinely, finally, afraid. "Dad," he said, and his voice had none of its rehearsed calm left in it. "I never wanted you dead. I swear to you, I told myself the house was enough, that we'd find you somewhere decent. I didn't know about the policy until it was all ready." "You knew on Wednesday morning," I said quietly, "when I called and told you I hadn't signed anything. And you told me I was losing my mind instead of telling me the truth. You had 4 days to choose differently, Nathan. You chose to get in the car every one of those days." He had no answer to that, because there wasn't one. It was Vanessa, cornered now between the agents and the head table, who made the final, fatal mistake of the evening. The mistake that, more than anything I'd said into that microphone, finished what remained of Nathan's loyalty to her. She turned on him, not on me, her carefully maintained composure gone entirely. "This is your fault," she hissed, loud enough to carry across the stunned quiet of the room. "You told me he was harmless. You told me this would be clean. I never wanted any part of your pathetic, sentimental family, Nathan. I wanted the money, and you have cost me everything." Nathan flinched as if she'd struck him, and something in his face closed, finally and completely. the last door of whatever he'd been telling himself about the two of them. He didn't defend her, he didn't move to comfort her. He simply stepped back, put half a room's distance between himself and the woman he'd married 9 days earlier, and looked, for the first time all evening, entirely and only like my son. The agents reached them a moment later. I watched the cuffs close around Vanessa's wrists, watched her twist and shout something about lawyers and lawsuits that nobody in that room had the appetite to listen to anymore. Nathan didn't resist when they came for him. He simply held out his hands, his eyes on the marble floor, and said nothing at all, which was, I think, the closest thing to honesty I'd heard from him all week. I did not stay to watch them read the charges. I walked instead toward the small side room off the main hall where the foundation kept its records, needing a moment alone with the ringing quiet that follows any explosion, and found Diego waiting for me in the doorway, his face still pale with the shock of what he'd just watched his oldest friend become. "I should have called him more," Diego said. "The year we stopped talking, I told myself it was pride. Maybe if I'd pushed—" "Don't," I said, and put a hand on his shoulder, the first time I'd let myself touch another person with anything other than performed frailty in 8 days. "You didn't build the trap he walked into. I don't get to hand my failures to you just because it would feel easier than carrying them myself." He looked at me for a long moment, and then, without either of us quite deciding to, we were embracing, two men who hadn't hugged since Nathan's high school graduation, standing in a records room off a marble hall, holding on the way people hold on when a thing they've both been afraid of has finally actually happened. I felt something in my own chest give way that I hadn't let go of since 1987, since a shotgun and a teller named Rosa and 90 seconds of a fear I'd spent 37 years calling paralysis, instead of what Rosa had always insisted it actually was. Ruth found me there 10 minutes later, tablet in hand, her expression carrying the particular weight of someone about to deliver the last piece of a puzzle. "There's something you should see before the night's over," she said, and handed me the tablet. It was a wire confirmation, dated that same afternoon, routed through 3 shell accounts before landing at a private trading advisory downtown, Preston Wexler's firm. The payment source was a numbered account tied through 2 more layers Ruth had spent the entire week unwinding to Vanessa's original consulting LLC. Wexler had known, apparently, exactly how close Marek's ultimatum had come, and exactly how close I'd come to discovering it, because that afternoon, hours before the gala, he had quietly liquidated every asset he could reach in Vanessa's accounts and wired the proceeds to himself, dressed up as an advisory fee for services rendered, abandoning her the instant her usefulness to him ran out, the same way he'd apparently abandoned 3 families before mine, once their estates had been picked clean. He was never going to let her win either way, Ruth said. "Whether you paid off the debt or Marek's men showed up at that penthouse," Wexler collected, "you just moved faster than his exit plan expected." I looked at that confirmation for a long time. Somewhere in that number was the final ugly shape of the whole thing. Not a son who woke up one morning and decided to murder his father, but a young woman, cruel in her own right, and fully responsible for what she'd chosen to do with the trap she found herself in, who had nonetheless been fed into that trap for 6 years by a man patient and cold enough to farm entire families for a living, and who had walked away from her exactly as quickly as he'd walked away from whoever came before her. It didn't make Vanessa less guilty. It made the whole architecture of what had almost happened to me feel, somehow, both larger and lonelier than I'd understood it to be even an hour earlier. "Send it to the agents before they leave the building," I said. "Wexler doesn't get to walk out of this because he was clever enough to stay 2 names removed from the paperwork." She was already typing. I stayed at the gala another hour, longer than I intended to, because Rosa Delgado insisted on sitting with me at a corner table while the caterers quietly cleared plates around the wreckage of an evening nobody would forget, and her granddaughter fell asleep against my arm somewhere around 11, small and warm and entirely unaware of the $4.5 million that had, an hour earlier, been the exact price of my absence from this world. "You did the hard part," Rosa said, watching me the way she used to watch a vault door close, checking the seal. The part that's left is going to be harder, in its own way. She was right, though it took me another 2 weeks to understand what she meant. Nathan pleaded to reduce charges, conspiracy, wire fraud, forgery, in exchange for full cooperation and testimony against Vanessa and Wexler, both of whom were indicted on considerably heavier counts once federal prosecutors understood the scope of what Ruth's audit had uncovered. Vanessa's plea negotiations dragged for months. Wexler's did not, because prosecutors found, once they started looking, 3 other families willing to testify about what his advisory firm had done to them long before he ever met her. I have not spoken to Vanessa since the night the agents led her out of that marble hall, and I do not expect to. Nathan, I did speak to, eventually, though it took me longer than I'm proud of. He wrote to me from a halfway house 8 months into a sentence reduced by cooperation, a letter 3 pages long that I read 4 times before I answered it, and in it, for the first time in either of our lives, he did not perform anything. He simply told me he was sorry, in plain, unadorned language, and that he understood if I never wanted to see him again, and that he intended to spend whatever years he had left trying to become a man his mother wouldn't have been ashamed of, whether or not I was there to witness it. I wrote back. I told him about the letter Margaret left me, the one that said I'd built a vault around him without meaning to, and I told him I intended to spend whatever years I had left learning how to open one properly, if he was willing to be patient with an old man learning it too late. We meet now, once a month, at a diner near the halfway house, and we don't talk about the money, and we don't talk about Vanessa, and mostly we don't talk about much of anything important at all. Baseball, the weather, the small, unremarkable texture of 2 lives slowly, carefully, learning how to be honest with each other. It is not forgiveness, not yet, not all the way. But it is, I have come to believe, the only kind of vault worth building, the kind you leave unlocked on purpose, and trust the person on the other side to walk through gently. I still keep the brass key from my very first bank vault on a chain in my desk drawer, the one I started my career opening, back when I was 23 years old, and frozen, and certain I'd never forgive myself for standing still. Rosa was right, all those years later, about what that stillness actually was. I think about that key sometimes when I unlock my own front door now, in the house that is, once again, legally and entirely mine, and I think that the truest security anyone ever builds isn't the kind that keeps people out. It's the kind that finally, carefully, learns who's safe enough to let back in. If someone you loved ever decided quietly that you were worth more to them closed out than kept open, I hope you found the strength I found far too late in my own life to find it. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and if any part of Walter's story reached you, hit like, subscribe, and stay, because the next story might be the one that finally teaches someone in your own family how to open the vault instead of building another one.